Hi, welcome to SED 386, where we today are talking about lesson number 6. So I look forward to our conversation today, and hopefully at the same time you're viewing this video lecture, you will have your ReggieNet course site open so you can refer to some of the specific documents that we're going to look at together today, and also that you have your textbook available, because we will refer to some pages in your textbook. You also might want to have those PDF notes printed out. It's the PowerPoint that we're going to look at, but you can print them out, or some way that you might want to make notes of things that are important to you. So let's get started. We're going to talk about 2 chapters in our Blended Practices book. Both of them focus on instructional practices. However, the first one is more global and appropriate instructional practices for all children. The second, chapter 5, is talking about universal instruction practices, again for all children, but beginning to look at that framework, a pyramid framework regarding our instructional practices. So let's start by talking about chapter number 4, and our authors want to remind us that there are 4 basic practices that you always want to have in place in a blended classroom. And before we proceed, let's make sure we know what we're talking about. What do you think of when I say blended classroom? Hopefully what you're thinking about is children with and children without IEPs in the preschool level. Also for the birth to 3 level, thinking of young children in that age group with and without IFSPs. Another way to think about blended is you're going to have children who are typically developing and children who are atypically developing, who have some challenges in some areas of their development. So let's go back to what the authors talk about with the basic 4. We want to make sure that all children's needs are being met. So in this type of an inclusive setting, which is blended, we're paying attention to all of our learners and thinking about their learning development in a very specific individualized way, as well as a large group focus. So are all the children's needs being met? Number 2, we are going to differentiate, be very specific about our instructional strategies per child or per group of children or for the whole class. We're also going to think about and determine each child's zone of proximal development, and there's a nice section in your chapter about that topic. If this is a new topic for you, I encourage you to wrap your head around it. You're going to hear a lot about ZPD, or zone of proximal development, in our early childhood courses. And number 4, making sure that we are embedding opportunities for specific learning for individual children across the day, throughout our schedule, and throughout different routines and activities that we have in our daily schedules. And we'll spend some time talking about those schedules right now. So on page 73 in your text in chapter 4, there is, I'm turning to my page 73 right now, a nice example of a classroom embedding schedule. This is for Kendall, a student in Miss Reichert's class. And on the left, you'll see in her schedule is the activity. And then specifically looking at Kendall's target behaviors. Some of this information we're talking about today should sound familiar to you from our building blocks chapters that we just finished in our last few lessons. So in this matrix, if you will, the teacher, Miss Reichert, is embedding specific activities for Kendall across the day. So let's just look at, I like small group. So Kendall's target behaviors, one of them is writing letters. So he'll have an opportunity during small group time to write letters using sensory materials. And I'm thinking of, I like to use shaving cream in my classroom on the table top. We make sure it doesn't have any perfume in it or scents to it. But this is a fun way for kids to do a sensory activity. And then manipulating large items, objects in small group. An example is an oversized shirt prior to painting or using glue. Let's look at outdoor play. For retelling stories with Kendall, for the target behavior, Miss Reichert is going to have him discuss important things that went on while they're in his life, while they're walking to the playground. So what would that be for a preschool child? Maybe Miss Kendall picked up on the fact they got a new puppy, or maybe they moved, or maybe a grandparent came to visit. Those are just a few examples. Also, I want to point out that on ReggieNet, I have posted for you a PDF of several pages of examples of schedules for classrooms that folks that I've worked with over the years. And so we have some programs that are half-day sessions and some that are full-day sessions, some that are morning, some that are afternoon. So there's a variety of schedules for you there. And this might be a good time for you to stop and look at those for a little bit, giving you some more ideas of what's going on in a typical preschool classroom and when and where would you embed some activities, because that's what we want for our kids across the day and across environments and settings. Now we're going to get into the meat of this chapter, chapter number 4, and our authors are going to go through and talk about a variety of terms, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to investigate these terms on your own. I know you've already read the text, but what I'm asking you to do for an activity, and this is in your learning activity section on ReggieNet. So lesson 6, and the topic of this whole lesson is instruction. So if you want to look at your assignment right now, you can see that one of the, well, actually the first activity for slide 5 is using the content of this chapter. You're going to define or put a little information about each one of these terms. There's a Word document attached to this assignment, and you can download that, fill that out, and upload it when you are done. So these are terms that are going to be important as we move forward, and giving you a chance to review those on your own, and I will move on. There are a variety of kinds of curriculum modifications, and we're going to look at page 74 in your text. Flipping to that now. On the page 74, at table 4.1, there's an awesome list of types of curriculum modifications. And so in the left-hand column, the authors have just titled that, what is the topic of that modification, a definition, and some of the examples of the strategies that you could use as a teacher. So I want to call your attention to that, and you might want to make special note of where that's at, because one of the activities you're doing with those 6 assignments is actually doing an activity matrix for your case study child, and you'll want to have lots of ideas and examples of what those could be. So this would be a great reference for you. And then, of course, the authors in this text have gone ahead and described each one of these types of curriculum modifications. I think pretty much everything's self-explanatory between your text and this list, so that gives you an opportunity to learn about curriculum modifications. The next slide, which is slide 7, also has an activity connected to it. There are actually 2 activities connected with this slide. You have a story about Miss Delmy's classroom, and you have several questions to answer. That's actually question number 3 about her classroom and the examples given here. The second part, which is actually question 2, so these are kind of in the wrong order, but you'll be fine. And they're both on slide 7. You're going to list each tier, so you're going to put tier 1, universal, and you are going to explain what that tier is, and then give an example from the story of what she was doing in her classroom, or what they were doing in their classroom, that supports that tier. So let's talk for a minute about the 3 tiers. You can see that the universal tier, which is this bottom one, is the largest area because all children need support. Whoops. When we talk about universal instruction, we're talking about those high-quality interactions that we want to hear and see happening between teachers and children and between the adults in the classroom. We're also thinking about the high-quality social and physical environment, and then also looking at implementation of principles that are in place for universal design for learning. that UDL that you described a little bit earlier in your lesson. And then for the focused, which is this middle area here, remember, all children need universal. Some children need focused instruction. And that's thinking about which children need some scaffolding strategies. They need small group instruction. They might need some peer-mediated strategies. And your authors talk more about that as you move forward in your reading. And then finally, the smaller area, which is the top of your pyramid right there. And it is a smaller area because some children need that. Some individual children need that systematic support. And what we're looking at there is individual learning needs of the children. These supports, this instruction is going to be more intensive in nature. It's very highly prescribed procedures that will help with that student's learning. And you have some awesome examples of all three of those in Miss Delmy's story. And you can see why when we talk about Willie in that story, or when the authors do, you can see that they're describing some pretty intensive supports, and it's awesome that those are in place for individual children. You can look at the end of your chapter 2 on the pages I mentioned here. There are some more forms that have been provided for you that you might want to use in your classroom. Now we're going to start talking about Chapter 5, Universal Instructional Practices. I'm actually going to stop this video clip and we'll start a new one in a moment.